So look, before COVID, 92% of companies in our survey believed their business model was not economically viable through digitization. So whether that's an offensive statement or a defensive statement, it's a recognition that huge change was needed. And by our data, more than 85% of companies have something going on that they call the digital transformation. So that was 2019. Now, the other thing that characterized that, if we go to the next slide, reality is harder than revolution. So this was from some survey work that we did in December of 2019. And I would argue that that time period was peak cynicism for digital investments. 16% of companies reported that their transformations had fully succeeded, i.e. hit all their financial goals. And while many people were enthusiastic about what they had underway, and there were many public forums like this, people talking about the value of digitization, when you caught business executives or technology executives in private, you often got a different view. So a few quotes on the right that caught my eye from some of our conversations late last year. I can see the impact of digital everywhere except in my operating profit. Or I can see more pilots than an aircraft carrier, right? But how do I get these things to scale? Or one of my favorites, there's a big difference between digital natives who can change the company dress code and what it really, really takes to change a company culture. But that was pre-COVID. And then COVID came along. And of course, everything is changing. So on this slide that I won't walk through all of, if we just look at the last column in this slide, the next normal, we've got here just a very quick snapshot of the changes by industry that people are now talking about in the post-pandemic world. So in banking, branch networks shrinking more aggressively, not just transactions going online, but advice going online, cashless finally gaining steam. In retail, a giant transformation of grocery online, which in the past had been the hardest category to get right online. Consumer habits reset, as we talked about a few slides back. And in advanced industries and people who manufacture things, digital supply chains and what we call lights out digital manufacturing, that literally means the factory where you don't need to turn the lights on because it's all fully automated. So name your industry. In the last column here, we see a potential for a very different post-pandemic future. So how do you get there? So in our research of about 200 digital transformations and which ones succeeded and which ones didn't, we thought there were 6 elements that people needed to drive to get value from that digital transformation. So let me quickly recap what those are and talk a little bit about how they change post-pandemic. So the first one is a business-led technology roadmap. Right? This sometimes gets shorthanded as, well, you've got to start with a top-down strategy. And while strategy is a useful word, this is more detailed than a strategy. It actually is an aligned view by the senior business stakeholders of what the digital and technology investments really, really are. It's not enough for a CEO to say we want to do digital, and then for every business unit and every function to go and follow their own agenda. This needs to be aligned. And post-COVID, when we know resources are going to be tighter, you need to make sure that the best resources and the best talent are mapped against those priorities. And you need to make sure that the data and the worldview that you're basing it on reflects the post-COVID consumer and business behavior reality. Number 2 is talent. Now, everybody knows they need some of that scarce, magical digital native talent. But we also see a huge opportunity to reskill and retrain existing talent in companies. There's a great quote from the CEO of Tata Steel, the industrial company, who says that it's easier to take a metallurgist and turn them into a data scientist than it is to take a data scientist and turn them into a great metallurgist. And, maybe that's a little bit of an extreme example, but the idea of saying, how can you take the existing technical skills that you have in your organization and retrain them and redirect them towards digital, we see as being a tremendous opportunity and a key part of what should be in everybody's post-pandemic roadmap. Number 3, agile delivery. Right? Agile is probably one of the most overused words in business. And if you're listening to this, I can absolutely guarantee you've been involved in agile somewhere, and you probably have some agile squads and pods running in your organization. But what's hard and what's going to be critical post-pandemic is to get agile to really work at the enterprise level, not just in the technology teams, and to do it in a way where the business functions and also the control functions, legal, compliance, and the like, are fully at the table so you can really have Agile working broadly at the pace you need. Technology and tooling, I know other panelists and other speakers will talk a lot about that, and making sure you've got a technology base that allows you to do everything you need to with your talent, and it will feel more like being part of a modern software company rather than a traditional company for your employees. Data management. What we've seen is the key difference between companies that are able to move rapidly versus slowly in the digital transformation is often how well organized their data is. Often this is actually an organizational challenge more than it's a technology challenge. How can you actually create the data governance, the data operating model, the data ethical standards and the like that allow everybody in the company to leverage data as a competitive advantage rather than to spend enormous resources chasing it around the company. And finally on this slide, adoption and operating model change. Simply put, we think every company post-pandemic will need to be spending as much on adoption and operating model change as they are on technology. And if you're not doing that, you're unlikely to get full value out of the technology investments that you're making.